What's up, you guys? I am Haley, and this is my true crime channel. You might know me from ROBANDHALEY on TikTok, or if you don't, hello, welcome. This is my true crime YouTube channel, and today I'm going to be telling you the true story behind Netflix's new series, The Watcher. So this is a story that I actually covered on my podcast, which if you want to listen to it on the podcast, go listen to that episode. I'll have it linked in the description if podcasts are more your speed. But I covered it on my podcast quite some time ago, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it since then. So when I saw that Netflix was coming out with a show on it, I dove back into the story to remind myself, and it really is such a doozy, so I wanted to share it with you guys here today. Netflix's series is a dramatization of the story, and they change things. It's not a direct documentary of it, so there's a lot to the story that Netflix's show doesn't tell, and I think it's really cool to know the backstory behind it before watching the show or after watching it. Before we get into it, if you like my channel and like this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime videos. So this is the story of the Watcher house. Maria and Derek Broaddus were looking to buy a house for their family in New Jersey. The family had 3 young kids in 2014, and Maria grew up in Westfield, New Jersey, which is about 16 miles or 45 minutes southwest of Manhattan, New York. And that's the area that they lived in, and so they were looking for a new home. Derek was the vice president at an insurance company, so their budget for the house was pretty large. They found the perfect home that was just a few blocks away from Maria's childhood home, and it was located at 657 Boulevard in Westfield. In June 2014, just after Derek's 40th birthday, the family purchased the $1.3 million home. And just a little bit of background on the town of Westfield. A lot of people who live there have compared it to the town Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show, if you've seen that. Basically, it's a super idyllic, quaint town where neighbors are friendly and just everybody gets along. Westfield's population is made up of mostly families, and its 30,000 residents enjoy the slow, quiet life far from the city. At the time the Broadduses were moving in 2014, Westfield was ranked as America's 30th safest town by Neighborhood Scout. In 2018, Westfield was ranked by Bloomberg as the 99th richest city in America and the 18th richest city in New Jersey. So clearly people in this town had money. The median household income in 2019 was reported as almost $160,000. One of the residents told a reporter for The Cut that, quote, "There's a lot of money and a lot of ego around buying a house." This resident also said that bidding wars were common and that he'd seen people lose a house by up to $300,000 in those bidding wars. So the Broadduses were very excited that they were able to purchase this home. Now a little bit of background on 657 Boulevard, the home that the Broadduses purchased. Boulevard was deemed by residents as the best street to live on in Westfield. It was lined with trees and beautiful houses. And this particular home was built in 1905 and was one of the most beautiful and grandest houses on Boulevard. It was a 6-bedroom, 3.5-bath house, perfect for the Broaddus' family of 5. So that's all the background for now. The family purchased the home in June of 2014, and they were doing some updates and renovations before moving in. Derek and Maria had been at the house during the days, facilitating the contractors and workers coming in to do the renovations, while their kids, who were 5, 8, and 10 at the time, would be playing inside and outside of the house. 3 days after buying the house, Derek had been there all evening painting, and before he left for the night, he checked the mailbox. Inside, he found a white envelope addressed to the new owner. This was written in handwritten thick letters, and the note inside was typed, and it is freaking creepy. The letter began, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out." The letter writer also identified the family's Honda minivan, their children, and the renovations happening. It said, quote, "I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy." It said, quote, "You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family, or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me." At the end of the letter, the writer wrote, quote, "Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. Welcome, my new friends, welcome. Let the party begin. Signed, The Watcher." So when Derek read this letter, he immediately called the cops. He was extremely freaked out, especially because it mentioned his children. And when an officer arrived at the house and read the letter, he was just as baffled as Derek was. The police couldn't really do anything at the time because there was no physical threat. So Derek went home to his old house that they were still living in until the renovations were done. That night, Derek and Maria emailed the previous owners of the house, John and Andrea Woods, because the letter actually referenced telling them to bring young blood. Andrea Woods responded the next morning and told the Broadduses they did in fact get one letter in the 23 years that they lived at 657 Boulevard. The letter came just a few days before they moved out, and it was similar to the one Derek had read the night before, mentioning that the Watcher's family had been observing the house for years. But the Woodses basically thought the letter was a prank. They had no reason to believe anything in it, and they ended up throwing it out. Which I understand, and I really don't blame them for it, because it was just one letter. You're not going to think anything of it, so it wasn't a huge deal to them. So Andrea Woods and Maria Broaddus actually went to the police station later that day, and the police told them not to tell anyone about the letters because everyone who lived in the neighborhood was basically a suspect. A few days after receiving the letter, the Broadduses were at a neighbor's house for a barbecue, welcoming them and another new family to the neighborhood. The entire time they were there, they were monitoring other people's behaviors to try to see if they could notice anything weird and figure out who might have written this letter. They were also keeping their kids very close to them. At the barbecue, Derek was talking to a man who lived 2 doors down, and he mentioned that the family that lived between them, the Langfords, had a bit of a history. Peggy Langford was in her 90s, and her adult children, who were in their 60s, lived with her in the home. From an article on The Cut, quote, he described one of the younger Langfords, Michael, who didn't work and had a beard like Ernest Hemingway, as kind of a Boo Radley character. Which, if you don't know, that's referencing To Kill a Mockingbird, and it totally can make you picture this. So, of course, with this, Derek immediately thought that Michael Langford could be the person writing the letters. And the police did end up bringing him in for an interview, but he denied knowing anything, and without any actual evidence, they couldn't do much more. Over the next 2 weeks, the Broadduses continued renovations, and they stayed on high alert, but they were hoping that that would be the end of this creepy stuff that was happening, and they'd be able to move into their new home. One day, they were showing one of the couples on their street some of the renovations they had done, and the woman said, "Having new young blood in the neighborhood will be nice." And of course, this really freaked Derek out because the letter mentioned young blood, and that's not just a normal phrase that you would say every day. So, freaked him out a little bit, but didn't think much more of it. And then, one day, Maria checked the mail at the house and found another letter. In this letter, the Watcher directly addressed the Broadduses, but misspelled their last name, making them think that maybe the Watcher was close enough to hear someone talking to their family, but never having seen their name written out. The second letter said, quote, "Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy, and I have been watching you unfold carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time they will. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream." Will they sleep in the attic, or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession, and now you are too, Broaddus family. Again, spelled wrong. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching. So at this point, Derek and Maria were terrified, and they decided that they would no longer be bringing their kids to the house until they figured out what was going on. And then a few weeks after this, a 3rd letter came, and this said, "Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you. 657 Boulevard is turning on me. It is coming after me. I don't understand why. What spell did you cast on it? It used to be my friend, and now it is my enemy. I am in charge of 657 Boulevard. It is not in charge of me. I will fend off its bad things and wait for it to become good again. It will not punish me. I will rise again. I will be patient and wait for this to pass and for you to bring the young blood back to me. 657 Boulevard needs young blood. It needs you. Come back. Let the young blood play again like I once did. Let the young blood sleep in 657 Boulevard. Stop changing it and let it alone." So a lot of thoughts came out of this. First of all, the watcher, referenced the young blood, the kids not being there anymore, and they sounded upset about that. And secondly, they said, stop changing it and let it alone, which led the Broadduses to think that maybe the person writing the letter was somebody who had lived there in the past, and they were upset to see that renovations were being done. At this point, the police couldn't really do much because there were no physical threats, so the Broadduses kind of took the investigation into their own hands. One of the initial thoughts with these letters was that the person writing them was one of the buyers that had tried to get the house, but was basically lost a bidding war and was beat out by the Broadduses. But the Woodses said that one of the interested buyers had to back out because of a medical diagnosis, and another found a different home, so it seemed unlikely. Another theory was that it was someone who lived in the neighborhood. The first letter was actually postmarked before the sale was public. The sale of the house hadn't been public yet, so they thought that maybe someone in the neighborhood knew the Woodses were selling. They also thought this because of the mention of an easel in one of the letters, and I'm not sure which one mentioned it, but the watcher talked about seeing the kids playing with an easel on the porch, but that easel was hidden from direct street view. So they thought that the person had to be in the neighborhood so it wouldn't be suspicious if they were closer to the house. Derek was doing everything he could to try to figure out what was happening. He even set up cameras and spent nights at the house trying to see if he could see anyone watching, but that led nowhere. The family hired a PI who staked out the neighborhood, ran background checks on the Langfords, and did everything he could to try to figure out what was going on, but again, it led nowhere. They then hired a former FBI agent to conduct a threat assessment. So Robert Lenahan started analyzing the letters, and he brought up some interesting points from the things that he observed in these letters. So first off, he addressed the envelopes as M.M. Broaddus, still spelling it wrong, but that was something that was used a long time ago, indicating the writer to be older. So he was basically talking about the way that the letters were written and the way that the watcher, like the tone of the watcher's voice in the letters. And he said that the letters seemed to indicate that the watcher was angry at the wealth in the neighborhood and with new money moving into the town. Lenahan didn't think the writer would act on any of these threats that they had made, but did suggest looking into people who used to live in or work at the house that may be upset that the family was making so many changes. As time went on, though, the only real person of interest was Michael Langford, and the police tried to draw him out by having the Broadduses write a letter to the Langfords saying they were planning to tear down the house. But of course, that didn't work, and Abby Langford, one of Peggy's daughters, actually accused the police of harassing their family. Another reason the Broadduses and the police thought it could be someone from the Langford family was because their house would have had a viewpoint of the easel that I just mentioned. Eventually, the Broadduses hired a lawyer named Lee Levitt, who met with the Langford family and their lawyer, showing them the letters and the easel vantage point. But once again, this didn't go anywhere. The police did consider other suspects, but they had no real evidence to go off of. They looked for fingerprints, but couldn't find anything usable. And by December 2014, it had been 6 months since the first letter, and the investigation was going nowhere. Police at this point told the family that they couldn't do anything more with what they currently had. And Derek had his priest bless the house, and they hoped that this would just be the end of it. At this point, the renovations were done on the house, so the Broadduses could have moved in. But obviously, they didn't want to put their kids into a house not knowing where the letters came from, and this person literally being talking about the kids so much. The family had already sold their previous home, so they had to move in with Maria's parents because they wanted to stay away from 657 Boulevard until they felt safe. And this was affecting the family a ton because they were still paying the mortgage and taxes on the house, and they were constantly worried, anxious, and depressed. Maria was actually diagnosed with PTSD and started seeing a therapist. They didn't tell many of their friends about the letters, and their friends started to wonder what was going on, some even thinking that they were having marital problems. So at this point, with everything going on, Maria and Derek decided they needed to sell the house. So they initially listed the house for more than the $1.3 million that they had paid for it because of all the updates that they had done. But of course, there were rumors going around with what was happening with the house, so all of the offers that came in were well below asking price. They did send a partial disclosure to interested buyers and said they'd show the full letters to whoever's offer was accepted, which I find extremely respectable because they didn't have to tell anybody what was going on. But being the people that they were, the Broadduses did not want to entirely keep the letters secret. They wished the Woodses had told them about the letter that they received, even though the Woodses found them more as strange than threatening. And this actually led to the Broadduses filing a legal complaint against the Woodses in June 2015. This complaint, which included some snippets of the letters, said that the Woodses should have disclosed the letter they had received to the family. But more than a year after filing this complaint, a judge dismissed the lawsuit since New Jersey did not have any laws requiring any type of disclosure like this. The Broadduses wanted to keep this quiet and out of the news so that they could settle quickly, but a local reporter got their hands on the complaint and the story quickly went viral. There were suddenly news trucks outside of the house, and the family received over 300 media requests from different media outlets. This led to Derek and Maria having to explain to their 5, 8, and 10-year-old kids what was going on. So with the story's virality, many people began trying to investigate and figure out what was going on. This ranged from Reddit users to people who actually lived in Westfield on the street, who were now more on edge than ever. Neighbors who lived on Boulevard were also confused how the police were saying that they had done a full and exhaustive investigation when most of them were never talked to. Which I agree with. I get that they were trying to keep the details quiet because neighbors could have been potential suspects, but also you can keep some details private and still talk to everybody in the neighborhood. A veteran detective at the Westfield Police Department was asked to look into the case, and he agreed, saying that the Broadduses did not get the support they needed from the police when this first started happening. When looking into this case, Detective Chambliss discovered the results of the DNA testing that had been done and found that the DNA evidence on the envelope belonged to a woman. With this, Chambliss looked more into Abby Langford, who was a real estate agent who lived next door. Chambliss was able to get Abby's DNA to see if it was a match, and it wasn't. And shortly after this, the Broadduses were told that the Langfords were officially ruled out as suspects. Some theories popped up about the letters being an entire scam concocted by the Broadduses, either because of buyer's remorse and their desire to get out of a situation, or because of some plan they had hatched to defraud the Woods family for millions, which didn't work because the lawsuit against them didn't go anywhere. But I just don't believe that for a second. There's no reason to believe that conspiracy theory. They lost a lot of money from this, and there's no reason they would continue sending these letters if that was the case. Despite the fear and having no answers, the family did decide to stay in Westfield because they didn't want to disrupt their kids' lives. They purchased another home in Westfield 2 years after they bought 657 Boulevard, and they were able to keep the location of this new home private. The family was still on edge, but they were starting to get back into normal life. They took 657 Boulevard off the market, but it was put back up for sale in 2016. There were many interested buyers, but they were all allowed to read the letters, and once they did, every single one backed out. The Broaddus' real estate lawyer suggested selling the lot to a developer to tear down and turn the lot into 2 new homes. This would require the Westfield Planning Board to get involved because the 2 lots would be slightly smaller than the mandatory size in the city. And this ended up getting a lot of attention from other residents in Westfield, saying that this was proof that the whole thing was a scam by the Broadduses. There was a hearing about whether or not the smaller lot size would be accepted, and more than 100 residents showed up. It lasted 4 hours, and many argued about the aesthetics of the neighborhood and how this would change everything on Boulevard. At 11:30 p.m. that night, though, the board unanimously rejected the proposal. Finally, in 2017, something went in the Broaddus' favor. A family who had grown children and 2 large dogs was going to rent 657 Boulevard from the Broadduses, with a clause in their agreement that another letter would allow them to get out of their lease. The rent would help with the mortgage, but it wouldn't cover everything. But for the Broadduses, this was better than nothing. 2 weeks after they moved in, the renter handed Derek a familiar letter. This was 2.5 years after the first letter had arrived. The letter said, "To the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife, Maria. You wonder who the watcher is? Turn around, idiots. Maybe you even spoke to me, one of the so-called neighbors who has no idea who the watcher could be. Or maybe you do know and are too scared to tell anyone. Good move." So this whole letter was filled with things that showed that the writer had been following along with the story and its virality, talking about the news trucks, saying they took over the neighborhood and mocked me. It also said, and this is so freaking creepy, "I watched as you watched from the dark house in an attempt to find me. Telescopes and binoculars are wonderful inventions." It also talked about ways that the watcher could get revenge on the family, saying maybe a car accident, maybe a fire, maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day. It said 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. All hail the watcher. The letter also mentioned the new renters, and of course this spooked them, but they agreed to stay if the Broadduses would install security cameras all around the house, and they did so. So that letter is definitely creepier, but as of this recording in October 2022, that was the last letter that they have reported receiving. And the best news of all, on July 1st, 2019, 657 Boulevard was sold to new owners for $959,000. There have been some reports of the new owners' names, but for the most part, they've remained anonymous, so I'm not going to share, but from what I could find online, they've said they haven't received any letters. This was a financial loss for the Broadduses, but they were happy to finally have this house off their hands. And now Netflix created a series based on this case called The Watcher, which is out now. And this is not an ad at all, but I think it's going to be really interesting because it's a dramatization of it. So it's basically taking this story and turning it into like a crazy show story. But that's why I wanted to share the background of the Watcher house and where the background of the story comes from, because this happened to real people. And while nobody was killed and it's not your typical true crime or your spooky haunting, it is really freaking creepy. Somebody tormented the Broadduses for years. They lost a lot of money because of this, and they couldn't move into their dream home that they were so excited for. So it's such a sad story, and I feel so bad for them, but it truly is, it's just so freaking crazy, and I want to know who the Watcher is, and I'm excited to see where the series goes. But that's all I have for you guys today. Again, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, do all the things. It really helps me out, and I love you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.